My name is Maria Dalton, and I'll be turning 27 this year. I've been happily married for 5 years now, and our son, Martin, just turned 4. After getting married, I initially worked full-time, but eventually shifted to a part-time role at the same company to better manage things at home. My husband Kevin is 30, 3 years older than me. Our relationship began with Kevin being very affectionate and persistent in his pursuit, but once we got married, his behavior gradually shifted into something more controlling. Kevin has a younger sister, Jane Dalton, who is 20 now. Their 10-year age difference has always made Kevin extra indulgent toward her. Before we got married, I didn't think much of Jane's constant visits. I assumed they simply had a close sibling bond. But after our marriage, her behavior started to bother me. She would come over unannounced, at all hours, expecting to be waited on like a guest of honor, never bringing anything or even expressing basic gratitude. Kevin never addressed it. In fact, he insisted I make her comfortable whenever she dropped by. Jane barely acknowledged me, always greeting Kevin with an overly casual, "Hey bro, I'm here again," and speaking only to him. Even if I hadn't made extra food, I'd have to accommodate her for dinner. If I didn't, Kevin would publicly scold me, saying I should have anticipated her visit. Despite Jane giving half-hearted apologies now and then, it was obvious she enjoyed Kevin's favor and the way he always sided with her. On nights when she visited, Martin and I were left to fend for ourselves while Kevin and Jane relaxed on the sofa, the dining table left a mess, as if Martin and I were mere helpers in our own home. One evening, just as I was about to give Martin his bath, Kevin suddenly shouted at me to go buy a cake for Jane. It was late, but Jane insisted she wanted it immediately. Kevin blamed me for not getting it earlier, even though it was the first time I was hearing about it. Reluctantly, I took Martin and headed to the bakery. While walking, I overheard Kevin and Jane mocking me, saying I was thoughtless and wondering why Kevin had even married me. Martin, though too young to understand their exact words, sensed something was wrong. I held back tears and asked him what kind of cake he wanted. Smiling brightly, he said, "The one with lots of fruit. We made it just before the shop closed." I got the cake Jane wanted, and also a fruit cake for Martin. Once home, I served Jane and Kevin their cake and then brought Martin's to the dining table. But as soon as I placed it down, Jane pointed to Martin's cake and said she wanted that one instead. Before I could say anything, Kevin took the cake from in front of Martin and gave it to Jane. Martin started crying, but Kevin dismissed it, saying he paid for the cake and had the right to give it to whomever he pleased. That was the breaking point for me. I finally spoke up, expressing my frustration. Kevin didn't take it well, he threatened me with divorce. Martin, still sniffling, clutched my hand and said softly, "Mommy, I also love strawberry cake. It's yummy." He tried to be brave while eating what Jane had chosen, but it crushed me inside. Seeing Jane reach for Martin's cake again, I swiftly picked up the plate and took him to another room so he could eat in peace. Kevin, of course, apologized to Jane for the stinginess, not realizing how much he was hurting his own child. I didn't say anything further, for Martin's sake. Later, Martin and I took a bath together and then cuddled in his bed to sleep. The next morning, Jane had already left by the time I got up. As I was preparing breakfast, I heard Martin crying. His beloved piggy bank, a gift from my father, was smashed, and all the money inside it was gone. He was devastated. When I confronted Kevin, he casually told me Jane needed some money, so she took it. I held Martin, shaking and sobbing, and broke down in tears myself. Kevin's constant favoritism toward Jane had finally hurt our son beyond what I could bear. I confronted Kevin for the first time in front of Martin. Without saying a word, he stormed into the bedroom and came back with divorce papers. I was stunned. He had these papers hidden all this time. He shoved them at me and slammed the door as he left the house. Martin, who had never cried much over the tension at home, couldn't stop crying since last night. I couldn't let him suffer like this anymore. I told him we'd skip daycare for the day, and his face lit up with a soft, yes. We spent the day together. Martin brought over his picture book and sat on my lap, telling me, "Today, you're my nursery teacher, Mama." His innocent joy melted my heart. I decided not to go to work, even if it caused issues. When I called in, they understood and let me take the day off. We went to the park, played on the slide, dug around in the sandbox, and laughed. When we got back, Martin was drowsy. Normally, he naps by himself, but that day he fell asleep on my lap like he used to when he was a baby. I had planned to get chores done while he slept, but instead, I chose to stay right there with him, finding peace in his quiet breathing. But then I heard the front door open. It wasn't Kevin's usual time to be home, and I instantly felt alarmed. I quietly grabbed Martin and hid in the closet. I heard Jane's voice as she walked around the house, clearly looking for something and muttering in frustration about not finding it. Then she called someone, Kevin, and mentioned their search had failed again. When she finally left, I locked up and put Martin to bed. I couldn't understand what she was looking for, but my instincts screamed that something was wrong. I packed some essentials, grabbed Martin, and went to my parents' house, just 2 train stops away. Though I hadn't called ahead, my parents knew something was off and welcomed us with open arms. After I explained everything, my mother suspected that Jane might have been looking for valuables or bank cards. I remembered my background. Before I scaled back for family life, I had been a successful CEO in the handmade goods business. I handed over daily operations to my friends but stayed involved part-time, managing things from home. Kevin had no idea I was still CEO or how much I had in savings. I had kept it all private, knowing from early on that Kevin was financially irresponsible. Kevin once gave me just $200 a month for food and wanted me to quit my job. I never agreed, especially with a child to raise. Eventually, he let me work part-time, but made me sign a post-marriage property waiver. Since Martin was born, I've covered most of his expenses from my own money. Kevin assumed I had savings because I never asked him for more than the food budget. With Jane apparently in need of cash and Kevin likely seeing me as a source, it made sense that they were hunting for my financial information. I had a separate account for Martin, where part of my salary goes every month. But they wouldn't find anything. I always kept my important things with me. Still, it was scary to think Jane might be entering the house even when we weren't there, possibly with Kevin's consent. My father advised me to store all important items, including my cash cards, in his safe. Later, when Martin cried again about his piggy bank and the money he was saving, my father became furious. My mother, on the other hand, suggested staying calm, as any action from Kevin could be used to shift blame in the divorce. To get to the bottom of things, we decided I should try recording any future conversations with Kevin. With the help of a lawyer friend of my father's, I went back home later and prepared dinner while discreetly setting my phone to record. Kevin came home and immediately asked about my cash cards. When I questioned him, he gave me evasive answers and tried to manipulate the conversation. As I stayed quiet, he got angry and demanded I hand over all my part-time income, for Jane. I told him no, that the money was for Martin. Furious, he